is Jim Polsford, and I am the President and CEO of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation. And we've really had a tremendous start to this first annual conference of the Mexican-American Leadership Initiative. Many of you may have been with us last night when we had the pleasure of being at the State Department with the Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton, and the remarks that she made and some fabulous introduction that Jose Villarreal made of the Secretary, and sort of framing the times in which we live and the opportunity that we have to have some impact. The Secretary talked a good deal about how this kind of dialogue may not have been possible 5 or 10 years ago, and I think we'll hear a lot about that during the course of the day today. I just would like to say a few words of welcome as we get underway, and of thanks to so many individuals who have been so important in this initiative. The Mexican-American Leadership Initiative is a substantial program of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, and it's one in which we spent a good deal of time and effort, especially in the last 12 or so months, and it's a pleasure to see its fruition today, and so much momentum that has been already established and will continue to be so as a result of what's happened yesterday and today. So I'd like to thank a few of the folks involved in the Mexican-American Leadership Initiative in particular, and that certainly is Lou Viada and Raul Rodriguez, Raul Hinojosa, Victor Arias, and Martha Smith, one of our board members and the treasurer of the board, who was really instrumental in helping to establish a relationship that led ultimately to the Mexican-American Leadership Initiative. We have a number of sponsors with us today, and they are tremendously valued and appreciated. Grupo Salinas, Walmart, the Center for Civil Participation and Responsibility, and Fundamex. In addition to that, we have Promethean, the Inter-American Foundation, the Hispanic Communications Network, and the Mexico Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center, where we sit today, and the tremendous support and help that Andrew Seeley and his staff have provided to us to be welcomed here today and to take opportunity to use the facilities of the Mexico Institute. I'd also like to thank some members of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation staff who've worked tirelessly in the last couple of months to not only to help us organize the Mexican-American Leadership Initiative, but also to be ready today. And they include Jolene Perez-Gonzalez, Heather Wick, Mercedes Caso, and Pedro Pereira. So it's my pleasure to introduce the chair of the board of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, Jose Antonio Fernandez Carvajal.
Good morning. Thank you, Jim, for your kind introduction. It is a great privilege to welcome you this morning, and this privilege is for two reasons. First, we find ourselves here in the Woodrow Wilson Center, as Jim already mentioned, as guests of the Mexico Institute. I am proud to serve as co-chair of the board of the Mexico Institute, along with my dear friend and fellow co-chair, Roger Wallace, who is here with us today. The thought leadership of the Mexico Institute has become an important and influential reference in our bilateral relationship today. So let me recognize Andrew Seeley and his team for the significant impact of the Mexico Institute promoting a better binational understanding. Second, it is a privilege to welcome you today because I also chair the board of directors of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation. In these times, as the relationship between the United States and Mexico becomes more complex and more relevant in our daily lives, the U.S.-Mexico Foundation has emerged as a vital instrument to promote awareness and effective binational philanthropic collaboration between our two nations. One of the most significant components of the foundation, as has been mentioned already, is certainly the Mexican-American Leadership Initiative, MALI, that is the reason that gathers us today. I still remember when we discussed the initiative as an idea with Martha and Jose Villarreal and other friends of this initiative. We thought then, as we do today, that in order to strengthen our relationship, we need to help construct a better and stronger civil society in Mexico, much as how the Mexican Americans have helped construct this civil society in U.S. A civic capacity strong enough, respectful enough, and with high pride that will enable us to better engage and solve our problems and strengthen Mexico's institutions. Today, after just 1 year of work, Mali has become instrumental in strengthening Mexican civil society. The two panels that will be held today and the Mexican American Leadership Initiative Award is proof of this work. It is an honor for me to thank Maria Chaveste and David Ayon for their significant service as board members of the Foundation and especially as co-chairs of the Mali Initiative. And also to thank two additional recently elected board members of the Foundation for their vision and leadership in this initiative, Henry Cisneros and Jose Villarreal. Obviously, a special thank for you all who have traveled from all over the United States and from Mexico to be with us today. And to get us underway this morning, I leave the floor to David Ayon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jose Antonio. As Jose Antonio just mentioned and others have said before, my name is David Ayon, by the way. Maria Echaveste and I are co-chairs of this initiative, this experiment that we call MALI, M-A-L-I, the Mexican American Leadership Initiative of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation. And we are also board members of the foundation. I'm also a senior advisor to the Mexico Institute of the Woodrow Wilson Center, so this is sort of my home in D.C. I actually live in Los Angeles, where I'm a senior fellow at the Levy Center for the Study of Los Angeles of Loyola Marymount University. I just want to give you a quick overview of what we're going to do. You do have your programs. We're going to try to jump into our first panel as quickly as possible. We are under some time pressure, and we're already slipping behind schedule a bit. But after that first roundtable, I will be back to introduce us to an organization and a leader that we want to recognize as a bridge builder between the United States and Mexico. After that, we'll take a short break before meeting another such bridge builder and then continuing with our second roundtable. Then we will move to another room. Those who RSVP'd for lunch will move to another room for the lunch and the keynote address by the Assistant Secretary of State, Arturo Valenzuela. At the luncheon, we will also announce our initiative's first financial awards to 3 projects in Mexico. So in total, we will be introducing this group to 5 who we think are key actors in Mexico and in the U.S.-Mexico relationship that we want to call attention to, and we want to show the need and the viability of expressing support for them. The roundtable discussions we have organized for this morning should make clear the shared binational nature of the challenges we face, and both the need for cooperative responses and the compelling opportunities for our societies to work together. We're honored to have today, for that first roundtable, the Honorable Roberta Jacobson, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, and for many years, the key responsible person in the State Department for Mexico and for North America, the head of the Mexico desk prior to her current position. We also have His Excellency Arturo Sarucán, Ambassador of Mexico to the United States, Blanca Treviño, also a member of the board of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation and President and CEO of Softec. And we have Alfredo Corchado, the Mexico Bureau Chief of the Dallas Morning News and author of the forthcoming book titled Midnight in Mexico, Descent into Darkness. This is Alfredo's personal account of Mexico's accelerating violence in a search for hope from both sides of the border amid the bloodiest period since the 1910 Mexican Revolution. So if I could ask the 4 panelists to come up to the stage, and let me also introduce, moderating our panel, we're very honored to have the Honorable Henry Cisneros, everyone knows, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, former Mayor of the City of San Antonio, and Executive Chairman of CityView. And while our panelists and moderator come up, I'm asked to call your attention to, there ought to be a white card handy, perhaps taped to the seat in front of you. The idea there is for you to be able to write down any questions that come up during the course of the discussion, and you can hand those to staff that will be walking around picking up those white cards in order to be able to hand those cards up, and we can efficiently get as many questions as we can during the course of this roundtable. If anybody lacks a card to write a question on, please hold up your hand and we'll get one to you. But if not, in a moment we will turn give the word to Henry Cisneros. Thank you. To start our first roundtable.
Unbutton your jacket for me.
Thank you very much.
David, thank you very much. Thank you not only for your kind introduction of our panel, but your wonderful work over the last year or so. This is a long-term vision of David's, and there are many authors of this initiative, but from the U.S. side at least, no one has put in the kind of intellectual energy that David has, so thank you very much for all of that. It's a special treat to join this distinguished group of panelists. My job is to be the moderator this morning. Just a couple of logistical details. The session runs until 10:45, but Ambassador Sarukan must go to the State Department for a special meeting around 10:10 or so. So we're going to try to deal with some of the issues that he can address in the period between now, it's 9:30, and then. We also hope to go beyond the questions and discussion here on the stage, as David said, to take questions from the floor. So if you have some thoughts or questions, please write them down, and I will get them and try to organize that effort. This is an exciting moment because it represents a coming together of leadership in Mexico, governmental and civic, with leadership from the Mexican-American community in the United States, some of whom have generations of tenure in the United States, and others of whom are more recent arrivals, but recognize perhaps more sharply than any point since the revolution in 1910 the need to reach across the border and establish important directions between our two nations. We have an excellent group of people to think about those issues and to talk about them and share their thoughts today. So rather than begin with opening statements, which would then put us in the position of taking a majority of the time from the panelists directly, we're going to start with some questions. And not all of the questions will be directed to all of the panelists. I'm going to try to take advantage of this particular knowledge that different panelists have to get at key questions. But I want to start with this question. What is the present state of the relationship between Mexico and the United States? And if you can, in the process of answering that question, we'll begin with Ambassador Sarukan and go then to the Secretary of State, Assistant Secretary of State. Why is it important? Not only what is the state of play, but why is it important to us? Señor Embajador.
Thank you, Secretary. And first of all, an apology, but I will have to run because the Secretary of State is convening a meeting on national diasporas, and it would be rather strange that the ambassador of one of the countries with the largest diasporas on the face of the earth were not to be present at the State Department. So I apologize. This is at 10:30. So firstly, Henry, it's critically important because despite the clutter that exists today on the geostrategic radar screen of the United States, whether it's Afghanistan or Pakistan, North Africa, the Middle East, Afghanistan, or potentially Iran and North Korea, there is no more important relationship for the future security, well-being, and prosperity of Americans, or for Mexicans. This This is a two-way street. This relationship is uniquely important to the prosperity of both nations. It's as simple as that, but it's also hard to convey to many who, in policymaking circles in Washington or elsewhere in the United States, usually tend to focus on some of the traditional security and geostrategic challenges that America has faced, especially in a post-Cold War world.
Ambassador, could you break down just a bit the elements of importance? Economic you mentioned, security you mentioned, but if you peeled back the onion, what are those elements?
I'll certainly give you some examples. This sometimes may not be extremely popular in Mexico, or people may not agree with the fact, but the truth is that post 9/11, a threat to the security of the United States, or a perception of threat to the security of the United States, will have a profound impact on the U.S.-Mexico bilateral relationship, simply by virtue of 3,000-kilometer border and the fact that we have somewhere between 5 and 6 million undocumented Mexicans living in the United States, and that we have one of the largest minority communities in this country. So how we continue to develop, enhance, deepen our dialogue on security, whether it's focused on transnational organized crime, whether it's focused on preventing our border or our territories to be used as potential platforms by transnational terrorists, is a very important issue. Second, in terms of the economy and social economic exchanges, when you trade $1 billion a day, when you have 1 million legal crossings a day, when you have 75,000 trucks reaching our common border in both directions every day, when you think that despite the brouhaha over China these days, for every dollar that China buys from the United States, Mexico and Canada together are buying $8 of American exports, that Mexico is the second largest buyer of U.S. exports. Depending on where your focus is, if you like the traditional transatlantic relationship, Mexico buys more from the United States than Germany, the UK, France, and Italy combined. If you're focused on Latin America, Mexico buys more U.S. exports than all of Latin America put together. And if you're focused on the new Asia Pacific, Mexico buys more from the United States than Japan and China combined. Those are pretty powerful.
I think we
that's
get the
very
point.
pretty powerful data.
You are in better position than almost any person in either nation to answer the question, what is the present state of the relationship?
I think in some I know in the group will say in the room will say what Kool-Aid is the ambassador drinking. I think the current state of the relationship is extremely positive. Does this mean that there aren't challenges, that there aren't issues that complicate the agenda? Certainly. But if you look at the muscle tone and the strategic direction of this relationship, Henry, we probably had not had this type of strategic vision for the relationship since the days of NAFTA. It is a very compelling change that has occurred in this bilateral relationship, not only because I think we have, on both sides of the border, understood that the paradigm that needs to provide traction to the relationship is one of shared responsibility, and that we need to transit away from this being a Mexican problem or a U.S. problem and moving to a language of we. This is a common challenge. We are co-stakeholders to a number of issues which are critically important, and I think that what we're seeing these days in the realm of our security cooperation complements this gigantic change that occurred when we negotiated and approved NAFTA. It is the next logical stepping stone on the road of a relationship that has matured and has changed in leaps and bounds. President Obama and in his team, we have found true partners. They are engaged, they are working. Now, that does not mean that there are some days and some issues in which we continue to take on that we need to continue to take on and where we face challenges. But that muscle tone, I think, had never been seen in the relationship.
I want to come back to you in a moment, Mr. Ambassador, because I'd like to distinguish between whether the present, quote, shared responsibility is a function of crisis and response, or whether it has strategic character, as it did in the NAFTA period when there was a kind of a progress agenda that we were working. Think about that, if you would, as we go to the Assistant Secretary Jacobson, to answer the same question. What is the state of relationship from the U.S. perspective, from the State Department's perspective?
Well, it won't surprise many of you who know me well, but it may disappoint others that I'm going to associate myself almost entirely with the ambassador's remarks. He reflects very, very well the depth and the breadth of the relationship now. From someone who's worked on this bilateral relationship and then sort of expanded outward from what I thought was the most important bilateral relationship that we have in this hemisphere for 8 years now. Part of my commitment to that is because of something that the ambassador and I have talked about and words we have used extensively. We sometimes refer to this relationship as intermestic. It is an atypical foreign policy issue for the United States because it is so bound up with our domestic policy, with our domestic well-being, with our domestic security. And so it is both an international and a domestic issue for the United States. And I view that as critical with Mexico, as critical with Canada, as we look at North America for the future of U.S. competitiveness and for the future of our security and our global presence on issues that we both care deeply about. And I think that's one of the kind of refinements I might make to the ambassador's argument, which is simply that among those things that we look at with shared responsibility are not just those that I think get a lot of the headlines. Security obviously being the most prominent one, where we are both confronting organized crime that we need to fight in our streets, in our cities. Energy security, where Americans unfortunately will still answer that question about what country provides more foreign energy to the United States wrongly, no matter how many times we ask it and we try and educate. But in fact, North America, Mexico, and Canada provide far more of our energy security as we look ahead to whatever transition we make from fossil fuels to renewables. But it's also an issue of importance to Americans because there is very little in our interaction with some of those acute foreign policy crises around the world that affects Americans every single day in their daily life. And as the President has promoted the National Export Initiative, I think the ambassador's statistics speak volumes for where new good jobs are going to come from. They're going to come in part from our relationship with countries like Mexico, Mexico being among the most important. So I think as we look ahead to building that relationship, we have to be looking at it as a strategic relationship. Whether we're looking at COP16 in Cancun last year and Mexico's leadership on renewable energy and climate change, or whether we're looking elsewhere in the world at some other crises in partnership with Mexico on the UN Security Council.
So you would have the American people know that although the headlines blare with a particular message, that there is an ongoing strategic set of discussions that haven't flagged, haven't been delayed, continue to get attention. That would be
I think that's absolutely the message. Yeah. And I think the message is that those discussions, those advancements in the relationship are taking root, are sort of digging deeper into the institutions on both sides of the border so that they can withstand day-to-day crises or day-to-day political changes.
And again, just to hit the highlights, sort of bullet point, the elements of that strategic energy, you focused on energy security, the climate change issues, trade questions, competitiveness issues. The ambassador focused on security dimensions as well that would exist in any event. Right. What other elements to that?
Water. For the first time in the history of the bilateral relationship, again, we have moved away from finger pointing, an issue which, when all of us were studying, when I was a student of the U.S.-Mexico bilateral relationship, the Canal Todo Americano, the All-American Canal, how we've moved away from that old paradigm of understanding how we dealt with scarce water resources in the border region. Right. We've now developed, for the first time with the previous administration, now reinforced it with this one, a holistic water management project for the Colorado River Delta. Everything from how do we save scarce water resources to how do we address the impact it has on flora and fauna in the Colorado River Delta. Okay. So there's a fundamental shift in how we're working on a range of issues.
Let me go to Alfredo here, and because Alfredo has worked since 1994 at the Dallas Morning News, which positions him both as a student of the Southwest as well as a journalist who brings a kind of a populist view here from the people, from the communities. What you have heard, does that ring, at least resonate with what people in the United States, you think, believe, or in the region believe? How will this message be absorbed, if you will?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys for inviting me. I've been so immersed in drug violence that the opportunity to talk about U.S.-Mexico relations is quite a relief. I mean, I think it depends on whether you're talking to people on the record or off the record. I think in either case, there is a sense that the cooperation is at a whole different level.
More intense?
More intense, much more day-to-day, much more face-to-face. But that the issue of trust, the issue of corruption in Mexico remains still very much a big, big issue, that there's a lot to be done. Just give an example. You have a city, I live in Mexico City, but really my home is the border, and my home is really El Paso. And in Ciudad Juarez last year, you have more people killed in one city than in the entire country of Afghanistan, 3,111. So there's something still wrong. And I don't think people spend too much time wondering whether the bilateral relationship is going this way or going that way. They just know that on the ground level, the violence is still, it's such a scope, such a dimension that they're wondering, where is the solidarity from this side?
So let me ask you, you convey a sense that maybe the problem of the moment is so large and sucks so much of the oxygen out of the public dialogue that nobody can realistically believe that there's anything else to the relationship. Is that the sense that you're conveying, that it's difficult to focus on the other things, or at least get people to believe in the larger agenda, and that's just a reality we have to face? There's a kind of a emperor wears no clothes issue here, that, wake up, this is all it's about right now?
I mean, I'm talking about people on the level, on the street level. At the street level. I mean, obviously, if you talk to the embassy here, you talk to the embassy there, it's a whole different story. But the people at that level don't yet see the sense of hope, and which is something that I'm looking for. I mean, I think the biggest sense of hope is that this loss, this pain that started in northern cities is now being spread through other cities in Mexico. And so there's now a sense that maybe you can start creating some kind of solidarity, some kind of civil society.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Blanca Treviño runs a major company out of Monterrey, which services much of Latin America. Very successful businesswoman in what many people believe is Mexico's most powerful city, not in the sense of governmental power as Mexico City is, but business and industrial clout. Traditionally has been a financial and industrial center, and truly a wonder to behold, because industries that in the United States are spread across maybe 5 or 6 different cities are all concentrated in Monterrey. It makes it a very, very powerful, world-class city. Monterrey, many thought, would be untouched by the present difficulties, and was for a long time, but now those problems have come to the streets of Monterrey, and business people like Blanca have a special leadership responsibility. Blanca, how do you see this kind of theme that's emerged here, that there's a kind of a strategic relationship that deals with important kind of progress going forward issues, but that it's all eclipsed at the moment by the dimensions of the violence and the problems we confront?
First of all, let me thank you for your opinion about Monterrey, because I think people from Monterrey were very proud of having born
city.
there. So it is true. It's a great city. Yeah. Now let me move to your question. I think there are two different ways of answering that question. One is perception. It is true. Sometimes we act by perception, but what we hear And certainly the vast majority of the population, what we see is the news, right? And I believe that in some cases, for example, in my case, my most important market as a business is the U.S. And I receive calls every day from people from the U.S. asking us, is it true? Can I travel to Monterrey? And I said, I live here. I have the opportunity to move everywhere and live in the U.S. or live in Brazil or whatever. And I live here. But you have to deal every day with that perception that they see. Nonetheless, despite that perception about Mexico, the foreign direct investment rose almost 30% in the first semester of 2010. So it is something that it's sometimes you act through that perception, but regardless of that, we're very it's very encouraging that we still see that foreign investment, because in a certain way they keep thinking that Mexico it's very strategic for their business. That's the reason why we keep receiving, I believe, that kind of investment. But one thing that it's important, and Jose Antonio mentioned this morning, and I think Arturo and the ambassador, is that finger pointing. The next thing after perception is who's to blame about what we're going through. I remember the first visit of Secretary Clinton to Monterrey. I was invited to this meeting, and it was very encouraging because she started by saying, we have this shared responsibility. So instead of being prepared to start saying, but we expected from the U.S. that they would say, this is a very difficult situation for Mexico. You are, I don't know, whatever. But she started saying, this is a shared responsibility.
Good.
So she started by saying, we have to work together instead of blaming each other. And I believe that the business community, we now understand that it's a shared responsibility, not just between, obviously, those two countries, or not just the government, but we have to be part of that. We were not, as part of Monterrey, we always felt so privileged to live there. We never expected, as you said, that Monterrey was going to be hit. And so now we understand that we are not as privileged, that probably it was the best way for our business community to understand that we play a very important role in this, and important role in how we create opportunities, because someone mentioned this morning, sometimes you look at the symptoms and that drug balance, but it's something behind that. So I hope that the business community, we're getting involved much more than we used to be.
I don't want to dwell overly on the current situation, but as we have stated here, it presently is severe enough, and both sides acknowledge that we just need to speak a bit longer. Here's my question: could you speak to, and whoever wants to speak up first, because there's some kind of tough edges to the question, could you speak to what exactly Mexico is going through? That is to say, is this going to end? Is it a period of time? How much longer? Is this the beginning of a, quote, failed state? Or is this something well under control that will play out over time, a reasonable period of time, and put Mexico back on a path to progress? I think Americans want to get a sense for that, and it sort of is the big question on the table before being able to go forward to a more progressive agenda. I was in Monterrey for a week leading a delegation of San Antonio Trade a year ago, and I went in very pessimistically because it, frankly, as a person of Mexican heritage, hurts me a great deal to see what is happening in Mexico. So much of wasted opportunity. It's truly painful. I almost didn't want to go. And I came back inspired by the people that I met there who said, this is something we will get control of. This is not, the Mexican society has not rolled over to the drug lords. This is a battle, it is a war, but it is a war we will win. And they were so determined that they persuaded me that that was the case. Can you just, whoever wants to, just speak to the dimensions of this? What is it, really? What's the prospects, and what's the time frame? Whomever. You don't have to go first.
Nice try.
No, he gets paid not to answer it.
Let me first answer. Let me first answer what this is not.
Okay.
There are no cartels. One of the challenges that we face is the language and the concepts we use to explain and understand what is going on in Mexico. A, there are no cartels. Precisely because there are no cartels is that we have seen violence erupt. What do cartels do? They collude to fix price, and they collude to control the market. The last thing organized crime syndicates in Mexico are doing is precisely that. They're fighting and destroying one another to be able to control market and access to the market and price. So what we have in Mexico is very violent, transnational, organized crime. 2, there are no insurgencies and no terrorists in Mexico. Does this mean that the organized violent groups in Mexico aren't using tactics that seem to be terrorist or tactics used by insurgents? Of course they are. But their motivations are not ideological, they are not political. Organized crime, in many ways, is like a parasite. It invades a host body, it feeds off of it, it weakens it, but if it kills it, it dies with it. Organized crime needs a weak but functioning state to generate its main motivation, which is called profit. And I know that I engaged in a back and forth with this gentleman's editorial page, and some very, I think, opportunistically and unfortunately said that the Mexican ambassador was defending organized crime in Mexico because I said, watch out guys, these violent criminals seek one thing, profit, and they do what businesses do, which is hostile takeovers and mergers and acquisitions. One of the reasons that you've seen violence go through the roof in Mexico is as we jointly, the United States and Mexico, have constrained their ability to bring particularly cocaine from the Colombian and Peruvian areas of the hemisphere into the United States. They have muscled their way into other illicit activities, kidnapping, extortion, human trafficking. This is a fundamental change that has occurred.
Prospects and time frame.
It's going to take time, Henry. Whoever thinks that there is...
But Mexico, the Mexican state will win this fight.
I certainly think so. This isn't a shake and bake policy. There are no silver bullets. Look at Colombia. Colombia has had Plan Colombia in force for 15 plus years. If you look at the impact of Plan Colombia on the total tonnage of drugs coming into the international consumer market, or the total hectare of coca bush cultivation in Colombia, I think fairly, without annoying our Colombian friends, we could say that Plan Colombia has not had an impact on mitigating production and trafficking. But if you measure Plan Colombia in terms of the ability of the Colombian society, of the Colombian government to enhance rule of law, to bring down violent crimes, to strengthen the judiciary, to bring civil society in as co-stakeholder, it has been an unmitigated success. Right. But they've been at this for 15 years. Mexico is in year 4 of this effort.
Let me ask Blanca, from the perspective of the Mexican business and civic leadership, does the civic leadership have the stomach for something that is going to, quote, take a while? Is this a commitment, do you think? What's your sense? Or will people opt for whatever it takes to stop the violence, do some sort of a negotiated compromise or something, and get this out of the present realm? What do you think?
I think we have moved from one to
With
the
an
other.
election coming up
Right.
in which the next president will have to decide, do I continue or do I not?
I believe that we have moved from one to the other. I think at the beginning we couldn't, at the beginning we thought that this was a problem that was very focused in Juarez or in certain parts of or regions of the country. And then we start by saying, do whatever you, when all those killings and that violence came out, we said, do whatever you, I think we thought, do whatever you have to do, but stop this. And I do believe that right now we understand that we have to do it together, that we have no alternative, that it's going to take a while, like it or not. And probably, I believe, at least from our perspective, and for people that I have discussed this with, even though we think that it's going to take a while, I think there is a commitment that we have to do it together if we want to do it faster or better or more effectively.
The next presidential election, the upcoming presidential election, no doubt, there will be kind of nuanced strategies afforded by the different parties and the different candidates. Do you read the body politic as wanting to, as saying, stay the course, or give us something else?
No, I think the reaction will be giving us something else. I think that even though we might agree with this strategy from President Calderon, and this was something that had to be done, from different perspectives, I think people will say, but this was not the way to do it, and probably the way that they will react, or general population will react, is to saying, let's change again because we didn't have this before. Right or wrong, if it's accurate or not, I believe that that's something that you see in the population, that they think that if we just change, that will be better, which it doesn't mean that I necessarily agree or do not, or disagree. It's something that I think that's the reason why we see that.
Roberta.
Quick comments on aspects of both what Blanca and Arturo have said.
Prospects and timetable.
I think on the timetable, both are right that this takes quite a while, and that's not very comforting for people on the street right now living the results of this violence. And frankly, as a policymaker, I think we have to acknowledge that there is this gap between the reality of living this every day and the pronouncements that we make. So I want to acknowledge that openly. But there are two elements, I think, that are crucial and that take quite a while but need our attention. And we've touched on them, but I just want to highlight them. One is this issue of rule of law, judicial reform, ensuring that court systems, alternative dispute resolution, mediation are available for resolution so that we do not have pretrial detention that lasts longer than a convicted crime would be, so that we do not have every case going to court, no matter how large or small, so that the legal system is not so jammed up that no one feels they are getting justice, no matter what the resource level. And I think that's a critical factor for people to see hope and a way out, is to have some hope in the equitable judicial system that is more efficient. And Mexico's begun that road, but even Mexico has programmed about 8 years for that transition to a new judicial system, and most experts that we talk to say that's really awfully fast, even 8 years. To go through that kind of a change. So I think that's one area that continues to need a lot of our attention. But the other area is civil society, where it seems to me that things are changing in Mexico. The march that we all just saw on this issue, there's a consciousness that is beginning to exist. There are activists who are working in communities who really need to be encouraged. Because in the end, and when I talk to a colleague of mine, Gil Kurlikowski, who's the drug czar in this country, but has been a police chief 4 times in the United States quite successfully, he and many other police chiefs all over the world will tell you, you cannot do this with police or judges or prosecutors alone, or the military. You must have communities that are working with law enforcement, prosecutors, and that trust, that relationship of confidence doesn't yet exist.
And may I just jump in, because I'm going to probably very soon have to run out, but just sort of use this as a plug-in or a segue into the objectives of this very important discussion that we're having in the rest of the day. This is where the U.S., the Mexican-American Leadership Initiative and the U.S.-Mexico Foundation play such a critical role. Why? Because it is a unique opportunity to build bonds of societal co-stakeholdership between Americans and Mexicans.
Let me pin you down on that a little bit, and I do, forgive me for not coming back to you, but the ambassador, we said earlier, does have to leave, and I want to make sure that we get his ideas. First of all, talk a little bit in concrete terms about what Mexicans in the United States, or Americans, can do on the civil society front in Mexico. I've always respected Mexican sovereignty such that there were sort of lines that you don't cross with respect to how to involve in Mexican civil dialogue or politics. But now there seems to be an opportunity, perhaps because of the number of Mexicans in the United States, everything from sending money back to volunteering to what are the concrete dimensions is what I'm asking.
First of all, Henry, I would underscore that what we're seeing today in the realm of the possible today is in many ways, I think, the result of both countries understanding that the old Westphalian concepts of national sovereignty are no longer relevant, or some of those are no longer relevant for the type of work that we're doing in the bilateral relationship. One of these is how our two civil societies need to engage and work together. Just imagine moving away from an old paradigm of security to one of human security, where that individual, his ability to get justice, to his public security, his ability to conduct his business, his daily life, is enhanced by the state and by the U.S.-Mexico bilateral cooperation. This paradigm of human security to which we have to transit in the relationship as it relates to the fight against organized crime is what I think is behind the important work that this initiative can do. How? By working with civil society in Mexico to train community leaders, to teach them advocacy, how to establish non-for-profits. How do you start creating a fabric, whether your business is education or microcredits or health issues or judicial reform? How do we start creating a thicker template of social networks across this border? It already happens. Just look at the density of non-state actors that ply our border in both directions every day. Rotary Club members, Boy Scouts, baseball clubs, trade associations, small business associations. You've seen this. You live on the border.
Yeah.
And
Well,
how we extend that
I had
to
always
the rest
thought
of the country.
that Mexican civil society was pretty rich, that the dialogue at the community level was pretty rich, but
But it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist across the border.
immigration reform in the United States. I don't want to. To what extent does that fit into the paradigm of human security?
There's no more important issue for the future well-being of this bilateral relationship than getting A, immigration reform right on this side of the border, and B, having Mexico deliver the economic growth to anchor 300,000 talented, bold, entrepreneurial women and men that cross the border into the United States every year. Our loss is your gain. You know this.
The three-part paradigm that the United States works from: border security, guest worker initiative, and path to citizenship. The guest worker piece, very intricate, important. 10 million plus Mexicans in the United States, presently in an illegal status, that is to say, living in the shadows, has important human security dimensions. How important is that to Mexico?
There will not be comprehensive immigration reform in this country, and I know that there's a full-blown debate out there in our communities and in the Hispanic leadership as to how we move this ball forward. But I still believe, despite those who would suggest that because comprehensive immigration reform has failed in the past, that you need to cut up the sausage in little pieces and get, the DREAM Act here and an ag job program there. At the end of the day, comprehensive will be the only way that you can ensure that this will work. Why? Because it binds all the different constituencies together.
How does Mexico see this?
We think that a temporary worker program is a critical component in comprehensive immigration reform. Why? Because it brings back circularity to the labor movement across our border in a transparent, legal, and orderly fashion.
And is it part of the shared responsibility rubric?
Definitely. We have the responsibility in Mexico to grow, to create jobs, but also to ensure security on our side of the border and to ensure that every single Mexican that crosses the border into the United States does so, A, legally, and two, through a designated port of entry.
And safely with some
Well, that's
attention to the human
That's why we
rights.
think that this new bill that is being discussed by the Mexican Congress, that has been approved by the Chamber of Deputies and that is now being sent to the Senate, to create a border, to reestablish a border police force that will guarantee security, take on organized crime, dealing in human trafficking, is such an important initiative.
Mr. Ambassador, we'd love to have you stay the whole morning, but I promised I would tell you when it was 10 after 10.
Thank you. Thanks,
Ladies and gentlemen, the ambassador, thank you for your participation. Hasta luego. Gracias. Alfredo, we'll come back to you on this same range of issues. Any thoughts that you want to articulate, because you've been holding here?
No, I was just going to, I mean, when you were talking about what's at stake here, what are the dimensions, I was just going to add that really what's at stake is
In the present
in the
situation.
present
what-
situation.
the question was, what's really going on?
Right.
What is this? What are we dealing with?
I mean, I think what you're seeing is really the remaking of a country in many ways. You're seeing a war within, I mean, yes, it is a transnational, the implications are transnational, but it's really a war within the government. I mean, there's so much collusion between organized crime and some elements of the government that's why it's so difficult. And what we were talking about civil society, I mean, there's still really no coherent message. I went to the Cuernavaca March, I went to the Ciudad Juarez March, and there's
From the government?
no, from civil society.
Even from the community?
Civil society. And you know, there's do we end the strategy? I mean, I think very few people can really question the choice that President Calderon made. But unless they start seeing results soon, you have this election next July of 2012. You are seeing people walking away from the strategy itself. You know, is this? I mean, 40,000 people killed, more than 5,000 people disappear so far. The dimensions are huge.
Very hard problem to articulate, but I've heard a version of this, and I'd like to get your response, that basically Mexican administrations for 30 years had made some kind of an understanding with the drug lords that as long as they didn't get too violent or too big or too visible, that they could operate. President Calderon ended that tacit understanding and said, too big, too violent, you're going down, and initiated this strategy. However, the other elements of Mexican society, including the extent to which the courts and the police had been corrupted over time and so forth, made it impossible to make this an effective response. So this takes on a bigger dimension than just drug leaders. It's more endemic into the society and deeper into the society and begins to bridge this civil engagement issue. Talk about that from your perspective.
I mean, it really started under the administration of Ernesto Zedillo back in the 90s, continue on in 2000. And when President Calderon came, I think, you know, when he made those comments that he was going to go after the drug traffickers, it was very bold, very courageous. I don't think at the time they understood the dimensions. And I'll tell you a quick little story what one Mexican intelligence official told me recently. He said in December 13, 2006, you declare war. And it caught a lot of people by surprise because they thought they were going to take more time to study this, to finesse the strategy. But he says, you know, all of a sudden we're charging up the hill. Number one, you realize that you're not riding on a horse, but you're on a donkey. Two, you look below yourself and you realize that you don't even have a saddle. And then you look behind you and you see that the cavalry is going in different directions. And that in many ways I think sums up what we're seeing today.
Madam Secretary, would you speak to that aspect of shared responsibility which requires shared acceptance? That is to say, the role that the United States, and I think many Mexicans believe this deeply, that the United States has great complicity in this by virtue of the demand for the drugs and by virtue of the provision of military-style weaponry that allows the drug gangs to outgun the Mexican police. Can you speak to the U.S. perspective and response on that?
I don't think there's any doubt that this administration came into power talking a lot about the importance of shared responsibility, the importance of the culpability, if you will, on the U.S. side for some of what was fueling the violence in Mexico, whether that was demand per se, or guns, or cash, bulk cash, the fact that money moves through the system in the United States from trafficking organizations. I think what's a little bit different about this administration, and I think that it is accelerating, frankly, in its pace, is what's been done about that. I actually think we've said the right things before. I'm not sure we had done many of the right things before. And so that then began southbound inspections on vehicles going into Mexico for the first time, so that things could be checked for bulk cash, for guns. It meant a greater use on both sides of the border, and my part of this was the Merida Initiative, which was the foreign assistance portion of it, of non-intrusive inspection equipment to try and keep trade flowing at the border, but stop all forms of contraband, whether that's drugs, whether it's arms, whether it's money, whether it's human beings, working with the Mexican government. But I think in the most recent meeting that our security cabinets had, which is known as the U.S.-Mexico high-level group, not a particularly descriptive term, but it is high level. It's most of the security cabinet from each government. You know, there were 3 areas that we put some emphasis on as places we need to go next, working together. One was moving from all of our interaction being at the federal level, at the national level, to the state and local level, recognizing that Mexico has over 400,000 state and local police who are often seen as among the worst of the problem, not necessarily part of the solution. Also, though, there was a huge amount of attention on money laundering, on bulk cash, on how we can starve this beast of some of its oxygen, which is its funding. One of the things that we talked about briefly this morning, and I think we've alluded to here, is the way you have to go after the entire enterprise, not just the heads of the enterprise, which again I think is the way you get headlines and the way you get lots of news articles. But in fact, if you don't go after the entire transnational corporation, which is the drug trafficking organization or criminal organizations, you're not going to succeed. So you need to go after the finance. You need to go after the funding. You need to go after supply routes, et cetera, and you need to go after the demand side. And this administration has increased the spending on demand significantly in its years in office. We have seen a 30-year trend downward in drug usage, but not nearly enough in the last couple of years, frankly. That is very worrisome, and there's more that we're going to have to do. But I think a really open acknowledgement of what we confront in the United States that is part of this equation.
President Obama was in El Paso last week and said that apprehensions are down of people, which suggests that fewer people are trying to cross. The fence has probably had some role in that, but that our collections of currency are up, of drugs are up, and the suggestion was we're making enough progress on border security that we can begin to talk about immigration reform. That is to say, the first piece of that 3-part stool is being addressed. What is the State Department?
I think, from the state, we have a very small piece of this, obviously. The State Department's role in immigration reform writ large is to manage and implement the overseas part of it, the foreign policy part of it. There's no doubt in our minds that comprehensive immigration reform in the United States would make a huge difference in our foreign policy with countries all over the world, but especially with Mexico and Latin American countries. And that it would be a huge plus to be able to have an orderly and legal system that we could implement in our embassies and consulates overseas for a temporary worker program, and that would sort of take that issue off the table as a foreign policy problem. But our part of this is relatively small, but I think the President made clear that he thinks this is hugely important to the United States as an economic issue, as a domestic issue, as well as one between neighbors and friends.
Blanca,
But I think, I'm sorry.
let me ask you, what do Mexicans, leaders, prominent Mexicans, want from the United States? What after all is said and done, and after all of the self-reflection on what is happening in Mexico and the potential for complicity on the part of the United States contributing to the problem, what do people in your circle want from the United States?
Before getting to that answer, I think something that it's important, before you ask someone to do something for you, you have to do also something. I do believe that even though the agree or not agree with the President Calderon's strategy, something that also was very, was timing. That strategy to go and face the drug leaders or whatever came in a moment in which there are this lack of opportunities for people, so they have access to have a very strong army of young people that were looking for opportunities, and they found, and the more risk it is, the more profitable or lucrative it is for those young people that don't have any other opportunity. I don't know if immigration it's lower now because they found more lucrative to stay in Mexico and being part of those huge armies of drug dealers than coming to the U.S. because people look, when there's a lack of opportunity, they look at the U.S. as looking for opportunities, so they immigrate illegally. But now I don't know if they are staying in Mexico as part of those armies because they think that that's an alternative for them. Mm-hmm. And I believe what we have to do, business leaders, before asking the U.S., and I'm going to get to that, it's how we offer alternatives to that young people so it is not as lucrative to get into those armies, because the more risk it is, the more lucrative, because they will be offered more money to be part of that. I do believe
so the lack of economic opportunity has been a big part of this unemployment among younger males, for example.
Absolutely, because they might not be involved in that if they had a different kind of opportunities, or they could have I don't know, a job or something that they could work.
So is it your sense that the prospects for Mexican economic development, for Mexico being able to provide jobs for its own unemployed, is a realistic prospect? Is that something that you as a business person see?
We have to do it. Otherwise, it will still be very appealing for young people to be involved in other kind of activities, because if they have, definitely, and you have to take from the very beginning, I do believe that the family structure is important, having education, public spaces, things in which they can be, but also opportunities. Otherwise, they will look for the easiest one, or what they think it's the easiest or more lucrative one. I mean, because I think we are, as a society, sometimes I'm more concerned, my daughters, to be there, not because drug dealers will come for them or kidnap them, but other people, other people that are probably taking advantage.
Lawless.
Yeah, and
of the general lawlessness.
So ask for the U.S. first. I think there's a lot that we have to do.
Let me go to the question again. Mm-hmm. What do you think Mexicans want from the United States? Because our history has been replete with a sense that somehow the United States was not doing enough, or that the United States was part of the problem, or Mexico's problem. What was that old mantra? So close to the United States and so far from God, right? What would Mexicans want if one were to state explicitly?
I think it will be two or three things, and definitely if we believe that we're part of this, and the U.S. is the part of the demand of the drugs, and probably supply of the weapons, of the funds for those people. I do believe that what I would expect, first of all, it's about the guns and the arms, how easy it is for people to get or to buy guns here, because that's something that they use in Mexico. One thing, I think it'll be that, if you ask me. Okay. The other one is to work in demand. And I mean, if demand was not so huge here, and you can say if supply was not as good as it is, but the other one is demand for those drugs.
What about the civil engagement issue? Is there room in Mexican society for Americans, particularly Americans of Mexican descent, to be helpful at the community level? Is that a realistic proposition?
I think so, and Jose mentioned this morning something that it's very important. Law enforcement. I think if Mexican American leaders can go and show how important it is and how this plays in this kind of situation, I think it will be important, absolutely. And working together with civil organizations is important. I remember in one meeting, and Vidal was in there, how people from not just the Mexican-American leaders, I remember that they told us about this thing that one mayor of a small town in Mexico put this ad that they needed funds to remodel the park, the plaza, or the public space. And he put that ad in the internet, and he received, remind me, Vidal, like $500,000 of people from different Mexican communities in the U.S. They send funds in order to do that. So we will be impressed of how much we can work together. Not just civil organizations, but even not just the Mexican-American leaders, but also the people. One thing that it will be important, I agree with Jose, is how they can help Mexican people understand what we can do and what is the law enforcement that is needed.
Alfredo, what do you think Mexicans want?
I'll share a story of last year that maybe ties it in and makes the story more relevant to what's going on this morning. Last August, Andrew C. Lee and Eric Olson called me and said, can you help us arrange a trip to a colonia in Ciudad Juarez that had been attacked by gunmen. It was a massacre of 15, 16 young people. And they said, we have a special guest, David Ayon, who's going to join us. And I gladly agreed. And we went to this Villa Salvarcar in Ciudad Juarez, spent some time there, and saw how this community, after this tragedy, where you have in one street, you have, I think, 9, 10 kids who were killed on that same street. And you see this community rebounding and coming together, and they're building their own little civil society in that neighborhood. But on the way back to El Paso, as usual, there was a long line to get back to the city. I mean, I think it was like an hour and a half. David Ayon, we have a lot of time, and he's talking about how he and other Mexican-American leaders are coming together to try to form a bridge with Mexico, which, the metaphor, the symbolism of being on the international bridge. And me, like a typical cynical, skeptical reporter, I thought to myself, yeah, right, yeah, sure. This is probably, for me personally, the longest story that I've been covering since the 1980s, this idea that two countries can come together. So on the one hand, David, I apologize for not believing you at the time, and I salute you for being here. But I went back to this community, and I go back from time to time, and they asked me, ¿Qué les pareció a tus amigos? What did your friends think? And I said, well, let me ask you, what do you want from them? What do you want from the Mexican diaspora in the U.S.? What do you want from the immigrants? What do you want from the Mexican-American leaders? And they said, a compartir el dolor, to at least begin to share the pain of loss. And they're very clear when you talk to victims, they're not interested in charity, they're not interested in handouts, they're interested in solidarity. And I think from that, maybe something else can grow.
Well, let's explore the elements of what solidarity might be. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Is it the clubs sociales in the cities, the Guanajuato, in Michoacán, and in Los Angeles, and Houston, in Dallas, reaching out in some way? Is it sending money back? Is it rebuilding parts of communities with initiative from here? Give me a concrete sense, anyone up here, what concrete form that would, because this is what Mali, I think, wants to understand in order to put money into that effort from this end. What works? What touches people? I understand the sharing of the suffering. I believe we are there. The question is, what concrete element next?
I think one of the things you see then, and the ambassador's right. I mean, you have all these other levels of exchanges that are already going on. I mean, one of the thing I find fascinating about this conference is that you have all these different immigrant groups, the groups of Zacatecas, et cetera. And that's something that really hasn't happened in the past. But one of the things that you hear a lot from Mexicans today is that they want to be able to have Mexicans on this side, Mexicans who wield economic, political power, help on the Mexican side, help in the lobbying of forming a different country, a different nation.
Lobbying in Mexico?
Lobbying, not so much lobbying directly what the United States wants, but they want the community from this side to help them lobby their own people to create the kind of country that they want.
Are we at a place where the view of Mexicans has changed with respect to Mexicans in the United States? People who were once viewed as, at minimum, pochos, and at worst, at minimum pochos, at worst, traitors to Mexican society for having left at various points, whose children are raised and the second generation doesn't speak Spanish and have abandoned Mexico in many ways. Is there a different view toward what I think the census will say is 45 to 50 million people of Mexican heritage or Hispanic heritage in the United States as a potent force, as a viable source of what do you think?
I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we perceive that yet. Things like this kind of initiative, I think that will change that perception. You just mentioned the skepticism about the things that can be done. I will honestly say that we still today, or Mexico still, might perceive that Mexican diaspora as all the things that you mentioned, because I don't want to, I think this kind of initiatives will change that, and the more active the Mexican-American leaders are in this, I think that perception can change, and not just the perception, but how we can work together. But I don't think, being very honest, that we're there yet in changing that.
I think the current situation in Mexico is such that the sense of elitism is slowly kind of not disappearing, but it's taken a whole different dynamic.
The so-called oligarchs, the wealthiest families.
I mean, when you have all these wealthy families leaving for the United States, you have 28,000 businesses that have shut down. El Paso, and I know Victor is from El Paso, but we have good news. We now have a nightlife in El Paso.
Juarez, isn't it?
Thanks to what's going on in Juarez. But as a real pocho here, I mean, I was born in Mexico, left at the age of 6, came back as a pocho, and either my Spanish got a lot better or the pocho attitude changed, because I think things have changed dramatically in the last 10, 15 years that I've been in Mexico.
Well, it is a tremendous resource when we have tens of millions of people who still carry Mexico in their heart, despite the fact that they may be here for 3 generations, and who have increasing power in the United States, politically, economically, civically, and who want to help. We have to find a way to allow them to help and make it a mutually productive endeavor. And this panel has just started the conversation, and we look for the real answers in the next panel. Good job.
Espérame.
Thank you.
I'm very sorry for those who may have had questions that wanted to be asked, that we ran out of time, but what a superb panel, what a superb roundtable that was. I would just like to say a few things, and we're going to continue, and we're going to take a break in a moment. We just have to take care of a couple of things here now as part of our program before taking the break. First of all, the room filled up, the auditorium filled up since the last time I was up here, so I hadn't seen that it was full. So we might have some people in the overflow room on the 5th floor. So I want to say hello to anybody that might be over there, and wish you were here. But you may have more company as the day goes on in the conference room, which is the overflow room that has a very big screen there. We're going to do a couple of things right now before taking the break. Let me just say again, though, about Henry Cisneros and that really talented and distinguished panel that we just had. Henry Cisneros was once characterized by President Bill Clinton, when he was president, as the most gifted public servant of his generation. And I think we saw that on display because he flew all night and came directly from the airport to be here and to run that panel. And we just saw on display the sort of skill and talent. Aided by a very exceptional group of panelists as well. I'd also like to make mention of the fact that we've been joined by many, we can't mention everybody that's here, many distinguished people who have joined us today, but I'd really like to thank California Assemblyman Gilbert Cedillo, who has arrived, was really one of the great early supporters of this initiative. And in many ways, we might not be here without the support that Assemblyman Cedillo, at that time, California Senator Cedillo showed for our initiative. Many other people are here with us, very proud and happy to have them here. Esther Aguilera, the head of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. Dina Siegel-Van, the head of the Latino and Latin America Institute of the American Jewish Committee. I'm going to leave people out, so I can't go through all the names, but we really are grateful to have you here. We're going to do two things. One is, and I think I mentioned before, and this is in line with the fact that Mali and the U.S.-Mexico Foundation share a commitment to fostering partnerships between American society and institutions on one hand, and Mexican society on the other, in the spirit of shared responsibility for the challenges our two countries face today. You're going to hear this theme a lot. You know, this is our mind control strategy, shared responsibility. It should be clear, I think, over the course of just the few hours that we'll spend together, and without having to offer too many examples, that there are not only severe challenges that we face together, but extremely promising and important organizations and projects underway in Mexico that American society can partner with and support, and should support, and that it is in our own interest to support. Organizations that are standing up to the violence and its effects, acting to strengthen distressed communities and generate opportunities for at-risk youth. So we're going to start introducing you to some notable examples of such organizations, projects, leaders, and activists. Right now, before we take the break, we are initiating today, and we're a startup, this is our first event, we're initiating today the annual Mali Bridge Builder Recognition by so honoring two worthy organizations. And first up is an organization that's listed in your program, known as AMUX. And you can see that that stands for the Asociación Mexicana de Uniones de Crédito del Sector Social. That is the Mexican Association of Social Sector Credit Unions, an association of credit unions that works in over 1,500 marginalized communities, providing microfinance and savings accounts that empower these communities to contribute to their own economic development. AMUX is also a binational bridge builder in that it has started working with Mexican migrants who live and work here in the U.S. and that are involved in development projects in their communities of origin. I'd like for the very dynamic leader of AMUX, Isabel Cruz, who's with us today, thanks to the sponsorship and support of the Inter-American Foundation. Robert Kaplan is the head of the Inter-American Foundation, another distinguished participant in today's events, who made her attendance possible. I'd like for Isabel to come up and receive this recognition. Isabel, we're going to hear a little bit from Isabel now and much more in the second roundtable, in which she's also a participant.
Okay, I not speak English very well. I prefer Spanish. Thank you very much. Buenos días a todos y a todas. En nombre de las 96 organizaciones de finanzas comunitarias asociadas en AMUX y en nombre de su consejo directivo, en nombre de los 350,000 socios que integramos y de los 28 microbancos rurales de zonas indígenas, marginadas, que han bancarizado las remesas, convirtiéndolas en una herramienta de desarrollo social, quiero agradecer a la US Mexico Foundation la distinción del Mali Bridge Builder Recognition a nuestra asociación. Esta distinción al liderazgo de una organización social de base campesina, de base comunitaria, que se atrevió a construir soluciones de inclusión financiera que ni el Estado ni el mercado habían podido lograr. Tiene varios sentidos este reconocimiento que quiero puntualizar.
Isabel is expressing her gratitude on behalf of the 96 institutions, community finance institutions associated with AMUCS, and in the name of its governing council, and of the 350,000 participants in these institutions, and the 28 microbanks, rural microbanks in marginalized indigenous communities and areas of Mexico, where AMUCS and its affiliated organizations has been able to, as it's called, to provide banking services, bancarización, of the remittances that are sent back from the United States, turning them into a tool of local development. She is thanking the U.S.-Mexico Foundation and the distinction of this Mali Bridge Builders Award on behalf of her association. This distinction of the leadership that this social organization, based in the Mexican countryside, in communities of the Mexican countryside, that has dared to construct solutions for the financial inclusion of those that neither the market nor government has been able to achieve in Mexico to date. And this has various meanings.
El enfoque es un reconocimiento al enfoque que tienen las remesas como herramienta de desarrollo, que permite acceso a servicios financieros y la construcción de ciudadanía. Es un enfoque que hasta hoy no se ha dado a la remesa que se envía a México. No es viable combatir la pobreza sin desarrollo económico y humano. El acceso a servicios financieros aumenta el impacto de las remesas en el desarrollo local en México. 2/3 partes de los 2,448 municipios de México no cuentan con acceso a servicios financieros. Este dato de exclusión territorial masiva contrasta con los megaflujos de remesas que tan solo en 8 años llegaron o enviaron a México 163,000 millones de dólares mediante 568 millones de remesas familiares. Es un flujo de dinero impresionante, 40% del cual llega a zonas rurales donde no existen sucursales bancarias. ¿Qué es lo que nosotros estamos haciendo? En una pequeña proporción, estamos demostrando que si la remesa se canaliza, se paga a través de instituciones financieras comunitarias, esa remesa se puede convertir en ahorro migrante que sirve para invertir en proyectos productivos locales. Es tan elemental que parece imposible que no lo hayan visto en la discusión binacional. Una sola comunidad en la Mixteca de Oaxaca, con 200 familias, en 4 años construyó una base comunitaria de $1 millón. $1 millón en una comunidad. Hay 180,000 localidades rurales en México de este tipo. Estamos sentados en una posibilidad, en una revolución financiera que permitiría a las comunidades dirigir su desarrollo, tener mayor ciudadanía, lograr mayor democracia. Ese es el proyecto que está trabajando AMUCS.
It appears that most people understood what she said. I'll just summarize very briefly that what this means, that what this recognition is recognizing, is this effort, this very successful effort, focusing upon the potential that the remittances sent by Mexican migrants in the United States to be used as a tool of development. And that requires access to financial services, and as she put it, the construction of citizenship in Mexico and on behalf of the Mexican migrantes living in the United States. She mentioned some of the figures, of the numbers, thousands of Mexican municipios, what roughly translates to counties in the United States, in which there is no access to financial services. Over 2,400 such local areas in Mexico that doesn't have that. This fact of massive territorial exclusion from financial services contrasts, as she says, with the enormous flow, the monetary flow, that Mexican migrant families send back to their families in Mexico, from the United States to Mexico. In 8 years, some $163 billion have flowed as a part of over $500 million in family remittances, 40% of which reach rural areas where there are no banks. And she gave an example of a particular case in Oaxaca in which there has been the construction of a financial facility and a base for financial, not only channeling of these resources, but as a source and as a resource for development. And this is exactly the project, as she put it, that AMUCS is carrying forward in Mexico.
Un segundo elemento que quiero resaltar en este reconocimiento es la sociedad civil de México y su capacidad de transformar sus propias condiciones de desarrollo. AMUCS no es una ONG, no es una fundación filantrópica, es una organización de base social campesina. Nosotros pensamos que en México la desigualdad y la pobreza no serán superadas con donativos o filantropía, sino con derechos ciudadanos, con democracia y con justicia social. Las políticas públicas favorables al desarrollo en zonas rurales son el principal instrumento de Estado para reducir la desigualdad. La Fundación US Mexico Foundation habla de una filantropía estratégica. Quisiera llamar la atención porque entiendo que el reconocimiento que han hecho a MUCS, que están haciendo a MUCS, está hablando de esta estratégica filantropía que no es la tradicional de donativos a los pobres, que se les da un poquito de dinero para que coman o para que vistan un día o 2 días, sino busca proyectos de la filantropía estratégica que puede cambiar las condiciones estructurales de la desigualdad. Si algo podemos o queremos aprender de Estados Unidos, es la democracia, la transparencia, los derechos. Probablemente nosotros en México tenemos más derechos que ustedes en algunas cosas y mucho menos derechos en otras. Y eso es lo que tenemos que buscar en esta relación binacional. Una mayor igualdad, una mayor equidad, que reconozca que los mexicanos que venimos a los Estados Unidos traemos un capital humano, cultural y de conocimiento que aporta a la grandeza de esta nación, pero que también debe aportar y no empobrecer a México.
Again, I think most people understood. Isabel, eres muy elocuente. Más elocuente que lo que yo puedo traducir. Speaking very extemporaneously, she departed from the comments that are written here, but did point out that AMUX is not a non-governmental, an NGO, a non-governmental organization, nor a philanthropic foundation. And she touched upon the symmetry and the ability for the U.S.-Mexico Foundation and an organization such as AMUX to be able to work together. And to work together for what? Not in charitable terms, but as the identifying slogan of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, which is strategic binational philanthropy, which is to say strategically collaborating with, acting in solidarity with, a cause that really is about the extension of, the deepening of democracy and of citizenship. That sort of empowerment is what is bringing these two institutions together.
Y el tercer elemento que quiero remarcar en este reconocimiento es que lo que nosotros hemos hecho, no lo hemos hecho solos. Hemos tenido alianzas estratégicas muy importantes y quisiera reconocer rápidamente el papel que han tenido en este trabajo la Fundación Ford, la Fundación Interamericana, el BITFOMIN, el Fondo para el Desarrollo de la Agricultura FIDA, la OIT, el FIRA y la Financiera Rural de México, el Nate Center de la Universidad de California, el Interdialogue de Washington, pero también la responsabilidad social de empresas como Zurich, que nos permite ofrecer seguros de vida por primera vez en comunidades indígenas muy pobres de México, y también de las empresas remozadoras que nos dieron acceso al sistema de pagos. Y particularmente importante en este trabajo ha sido el apoyo y el soporte de las organizaciones de mexicanos en los Estados Unidos, las federaciones Zacatecana, la Federación Michoacana, las organizaciones de migrantes indígenas, que son diferentes, de Carolina del Norte, de Nueva York, de Chicago y de California. Todos ellos ayudaron a construir esta realidad que es todavía muy pequeña, pero que muestra lo que podemos lograr en los próximos 10 años construyendo alianzas estratégicas, filantropía estratégica. Muchas gracias.
Very quickly, Isabel thanked a number of institutions that have helped, that have been strategic allies in this cause of trying to move beyond looking at the phenomenon of migration from a legalistic or a law enforcement point of view to one that really stresses development and empowerment. And among those, and I don't have the entire list, the Ford Foundation, the Inter-American Foundation, the Inter-American Development Bank, the North American Integration and Development Center at UCLA, and a number of others. So with that, we are going to present our very modest token of this recognition to Isabel. And it says, the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, Mexican-American Leadership Initiative Bridge Builders Recognition 2001 to the Asociación Mexicana de Uniones de Crédito del Sector Social, Washington, D.C., May 17, 2011.